The Voice of the Heart, The Fate of Charles. A fictional story about silence, art, and redemption. The Man at the Edge of the Town. Year, 2043. Northern France. In a quiet village surrounded by green hills, there lived an old man in a weathered house on the outskirts. His name was Charles Villeneuve. The locals called him the man who speaks with pain at night. He was not famous. He had no exhibitions in Paris or New York. But every child in the village had seen him sitting on his porch, staring at the sky with a brush in hand and silence in his eyes. His house seemed untouched by time. A broken clock on the wall, a chair with a white cloth over it, and a painting on the wall, unfinished for 30 years. The girl who heard the unspoken. One autumn afternoon, a young teacher named Eliza Martin, 27, arrived from the city. She had come to teach art and write about forgotten painters for a cultural magazine. When she heard whispers of the strange painter in the hills, her curiosity lit up. She knocked on Charles's door. He didn't answer. The second time, he stared at her in silence. The third time, he finally spoke. "Can you make paint speak?" Eliza, confused but intrigued, replied, "No, but I can listen to the voice of the heart." From that moment, something shifted. The secret buried in paint. As the days passed, Eliza earned Charles's trust. Slowly, he told her about his past. A promising artist in his youth, once celebrated in Lyon. But in 2011, during a fire at a gallery, his wife Amelia died while trying to save his painting. He was late that night. He never forgave himself. Since then, he had never completed another piece. "She was the only one who truly heard me. Now, my paintings are silent." Eliza asked to see his unfinished painting, the one he'd worked on for decades. It was a vague image of a woman, her face soft and blurred, as though memory refused to make her clear. When paint speaks again. One rainy morning, when Charles was out walking, Eliza did something bold. She gently took the canvas into the sunlight and began to work. Not to change it, but to feel it, to finish it with emotion, not detail. When Charles returned and saw it, he froze. He didn't speak for a long time. Then his eyes filled with tears. "I've painted for years, but I never truly captured her." Eliza hadn't drawn Amelia's face. She had painted her presence. The feeling Charles had buried, she had brought to the surface. The heart's voice. Instead of writing her article, Eliza organized an art exhibit in the village. She called it The Voice of the Heart. The centerpiece was the painting they had completed together. That night, villagers gathered in the old church hall. Some cried, some smiled. Children stared in silence. The painting didn't speak out loud, but everyone felt it was alive. People said they heard things when they looked at it. A laugh, a breath, a whisper of love lost and found again. The long goodbye. A few months later, Charles passed away peacefully in his sleep. On his last night, he had whispered to Eliza, "The silence is gone." The voice came back. Life began again. He was buried on the hill behind his home. Eliza visits every Sunday and leaves a small sketch by his grave, a flower, a cloud, a memory. Epilogue. Charles's house is now a small museum. His paintings hang on quiet walls, and visitors come from far and wide, not to admire fame, but to feel. Above the door, in quiet gold letters, is a single line. True art is not seen, it is heard by the echo that remains. 2044, spring. It had been nearly a year since Charles Villeneuve passed away, but in the village, his presence was still quietly felt. In the wind that passed through the hills, in the light that entered his old studio, and most of all, in the painting he and Eliza had finished together. Eliza had not gone back to the city. She had turned down a university job in Paris. Her article about Charles had been written, but never published. Some stories, she told herself, are meant to be lived, not sold. Instead, she became the caretaker of his legacy. A school of silence. In a small stone building near the edge of town, Eliza opened a modest art school. She didn't call it an academy or institute. The wooden sign at the entrance simply read, "Studio de Cœur," Studio of the Heart. It wasn't like other art schools. There were no grades, no competitions. Students painted in silence. They painted feelings, not objects. They learned to wait for the whisper of inspiration, not chase it. Sometimes a child would sit for hours in front of a canvas, then suddenly burst into color. Sometimes a teenager would cry without knowing why, then paint something that touched everyone who saw it. Eliza didn't teach them how to draw hands or faces. She taught them how to listen. The letter in the wall. One quiet evening, as Eliza was cleaning Charles's old studio, she accidentally knocked over a cracked vase. Behind it, inside the wall, she found a small envelope yellowed with age. It was addressed, "To the one who finishes what I cannot." Inside was a letter, written in Charles's careful, old-fashioned script. "If you're reading this, it means you heard what I couldn't say aloud. I was not strong enough to face my grief. You were. Finish the story not for me, but for those who forgot that silence also speaks. Love is not only in the living, it's in what remains behind. Thank you, whoever you are." Eliza held the letter to her chest. She didn't cry. She simply breathed deeply, as though his voice had returned one more time, echoing softly through the room. A visitor from the city. One day, a man in a dark gray coat arrived at the school. He introduced himself as Julien Dubois, a curator from the Paris Museum of Contemporary Arts. He had heard about the forgotten painter of Villeneuve. He asked Eliza, "Do you think the world is ready to see Charles's work?" Eliza thought for a long time before answering. "The world is full of noise, but maybe it's ready to listen." She agreed to lend the voice of the heart, the final painting, for a one-time exhibit in Paris. It was displayed alone in a quiet, dimly lit room. No music, no explanation. Thousands came. Most stayed for several minutes. A few for hours. Some walked away with tears. The museum recorded hundreds of visitor comments, but the most common one said, "I didn't understand it, but I felt something. It felt like someone was listening to me." To be continued. Eliza returned home after the exhibit, quietly and without fanfare. The painting was returned to the village, to the same wooden frame in the Studio de Coeur. It now hangs where students walk by daily, a gentle reminder that some of the deepest stories are never spoken, only felt. And when asked by her students who Charles Villeneuve really was, Eliza always says, "The hidden brushstroke." 2045, late autumn. The leaves had started to fall in golden swirls around the Studio de Coeur. Inside, the air was filled with the smell of oil paints and sharpened pencils. The students worked quietly, as they always did, guided by feeling, not instruction. Among them was Milo Rousseau, a shy 16-year-old who barely spoke but carried a small notebook everywhere. He had joined the studio 3 months earlier after losing his mother to cancer. Since then, he hadn't spoken a single word, not to his father, not to Eliza, not even to himself. But he painted, and when he painted, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper, like the memory of a sound too quiet to name. The forgotten canvas. One rainy afternoon, Eliza decided to sort through Charles's old storage room, the only part of the house she hadn't fully explored. Dust choked the air, and boxes of untouched canvases leaned against the wall like ghosts waiting for recognition. Milo, curious, silently followed her inside. He stopped in front of an old wooden crate marked CV 2004, rejected. Eliza opened it slowly. Inside were 7 small canvases, rough, unfinished studies. They seemed ordinary at first, but one of them caught Milo's attention. It was a simple landscape, a lone tree on a hill under a gray sky. But near the bottom corner, in the folds of the paint, Milo noticed something strange, a faint line that didn't match the brush pattern. Almost like a crack, almost like a hidden layer. The painting within. That night, Milo returned alone with a flashlight and a small blade. He carefully scraped away a layer of dry paint, and underneath it, a second image began to appear. It was a pair of hands, reaching toward something or someone just out of view. His breath caught. He worked slowly over the next few days. The landscape faded, revealing a deeper, more emotional image. A child reaching up to a woman with her back turned. The woman's shoulders were slumped. She looked like she was walking away or being taken by the wind. No title, No name. Just raw, unfinished heartbreak. Milo brought the painting to Eliza without a word. She stared at it, her hand covering her mouth. "This isn't just a painting," she whispered. "This is a goodbye." The truth beneath. Eliza later found a journal entry in one of Charles's sketchbooks, dated November 2004. "I dreamed of the boy again. He stood in the gallery, alone, holding her hand, until she vanished into the firelight. He didn't cry. He just stared, as if waiting for me to explain why I didn't arrive in time. It wasn't about Amelia. It wasn't even about himself. The boy, he might have been real. I never knew his name." Milo speaks. Days later, standing in front of the painting, Milo finally broke his silence. He didn't say much. Just 5 words, but Eliza never forgot them. "I think this was me." His mother had worked in a lying gallery that burned down in 2011. Milo had been 4. He never knew what happened that day, only that his mother never came home, and that his memory had been blank since then. But now, somehow, in the painting of a stranger long gone, he saw himself, a child frozen in loss, reaching. To be continued. Eliza gave the rediscovered painting a name. The hand that reached. It now hangs beside the voice of the heart, both wrapped in silence, yet speaking louder than any voice could. And Milo? He paints every day now, not to escape pain, but to remember that even grief can carry color, if you know where to look. The mark beneath the paint. 2046, early spring. Milo Russo now had his own corner in the studio decor. A small desk, a window overlooking the hills, a blank canvas that waited patiently, never pressuring him. He painted in silence, but inside, something had shifted. The grief he once carried like a stone in his chest had softened. Not vanished, but changed. He could look at the color red again without thinking of sirens. He could look at flames and not see only loss. But something about Charles's paintings continued to haunt him. There was one tiny shape that kept appearing, subtly, almost hidden. A small, curved spiral. At first, Milo thought it was accidental. But the more he looked, the more he saw it. In brushstrokes, in background trees, in folds of clothing, even in clouds. The exact same spiral, barely noticeable unless you were truly paying attention. The spiral appears again. Milo kept a notebook where he began sketching every version of the spiral he could find in Charles's works. After a month, he had 12 examples from different years, different subjects, different styles, but always the same size, the same tilt, the same hidden placement. He brought his notes to Eliza one afternoon. She was stunned. "I've looked at his paintings for years," she said, "and I never noticed this. Not once." Milo asked quietly, "Do you think it means something?" Eliza didn't answer right away. She opened a box of Charles's old papers, notes, letters, and scraps of sketches. She found something she hadn't paid much attention to before, a page from a 1993 travel diary. It was stained, the writing fading, but in the corner was the spiral. And next to it, in Charles's handwriting, "Where words fail, leave the mark." A hidden map? Milo began to see Charles's art differently. What if the spiral wasn't just a signature? What if it was a signal, a trail? He started reorganizing the paintings with spirals in chronological order, tracing their positions. They didn't form a pattern at first, until he overlaid a map of southern France behind them. His fingers trembled. The spirals lined up, roughly, along a route. A path stretching from Lyon to a forested region called Montfort, near the ruins of a monastery. Eliza looked at the map, stunned. Charles never mentioned Montfort, but I've seen that name in one of his letters. He visited in 1989. Milo stood, determined. "I want to go there." The journey begins. Eliza didn't stop him. In fact, she joined him. Together, they took the train south, then hiked through the pine-covered hills of Montfort. The forest was quiet, untouched, almost timeless. After hours of walking, they found the ruins of the monastery. Stones overgrown with moss. Columns broken in half. At the edge of the ruins stood a small wooden door, barely visible behind ivy. Etched into the wood, the spiral. Milo didn't hesitate. He pushed the door open. Inside was a room, dry despite time, where dozens of old sketches were pinned to the wall. Not framed, not signed, just left behind. At the center, a charcoal drawing of a woman and child. The woman's back was turned, just like in the hand that reached. But now, the child was holding her hand. And this time, she was looking back, her face full of grief but also peace. What Charles left behind. There was a note beneath the drawing, addressed not to anyone specific. It read, "For the one who follows the voice of the heart, you have arrived." This is where I began again. Not with brushes, not with paint, but with forgiveness. Milo couldn't stop the tears this time. Not because of sadness, but because he understood. Charles had come here to let go, to find peace with what he couldn't fix. And now, Milo had found the same. To be continued, they brought the drawings back carefully, preserving them for display at the studio. The spiral became more than a symbol. It became a path. Milo, inspired by the journey, began working on his first major piece. It was bold, chaotic, and beautiful. A boy holding a spiral-shaped lantern, walking through a forest of shadows. He titled it, "A Lantern in the Dark." 2046, summer. The Studio Decor hosted its annual student exhibition that July. Villagers came in their Sunday clothes. Tourists wandered in from nearby trails. Children pointed, whispered, laughed. But one painting stopped everyone, young and old, in their tracks. At the far end of the room hung Milo Russo's debut work, "The Way Through the Silence." A boy, surrounded by towering black trees, held a glowing spiral-shaped lantern. The forest was thick, almost suffocating, but the light reached far. Every shadow seemed to retreat before it. Beneath the painting was a short inscription. "For those who walk alone, there's always one who once did too." The man in the green tie. Late that afternoon, as the crowd began to thin, a sharply dressed man arrived. He wore a tailored beige coat and a green silk tie. Odd for the heat of the day. He didn't smile, didn't greet. He stood before Milo's painting for nearly 20 minutes, unmoving. Eliza approached him cautiously. "Are you interested in the work?" He turned to her with calm, unreadable eyes. "I am. My name is Lucien Durand. I collect works that speak louder than the canvas allows." Then he handed her a card, embossed, no logo, just his name and a Paris address. "This piece has something buried, deeper than emotion, deeper than form, something only the artist, or someone he's connected to, would understand." Before Eliza could respond, he added, "Tell the boy, the symbol is older than he thinks." And Charles was not the first to use it. And just like that, he left. The spiral's older echo. That night, Milo and Eliza searched the archives. They scanned through every known painting of Charles, his diaries, his correspondence. No mention of anyone using the spiral before him, until they found something strange. A scanned letter, dated 1971, written not by Charles, but to Charles. The return address had long faded, but the signature was intact. U.A.B. The letter was brief, but clear. "Your sketch from Venice, the spiral you've begun using, it matches one I've seen before. My mentor showed me in 1954, said it was used by a group who believed art could store memory. Real memory. Memory that passes between generations. I urge you, be careful where you paint it." A dangerous idea. Milo felt a chill. "Is that even possible?" he asked. "That art can carry memory?" "Emotion, yes. But actual memory?" Eliza answered carefully. "I've stood in front of certain paintings that made me remember things I'd never lived. Maybe memory isn't just stored in the mind. Maybe it echoes in light, in sound, in brushstrokes." Milo stared at his own work. "Then what did I just share with the world?" The offer. A week later, Lucien Durand sent an official letter to Eliza. He offered to purchase Milo's painting for an unthinkable sum. Enough to renovate the studio. Enough to send every student to school for years. But with one condition. The painting will never be displayed publicly. It must remain in my private collection, indefinitely. Milo was stunned. Grateful, but suspicious. Why hide it if it's beautiful? Eliza frowned. She remembered Lucien's words. Charles was not the first. What did he know? And why did he want the painting hidden? To be continued. Milo sat alone that night, lantern light flickering beside him. He touched the corner of his canvas, where the spiral glowed faintly under layers of paint. If I keep painting, what else will I find? And what did Charles discover that he never told anyone? The spiral had led him to memory, to healing. But now it might be opening something much older, something meant to stay buried. The archive below the city. 2046, late summer. Paris. Milo Rousseau had never left his village alone before. But now, at 17, carrying only a sketchbook, an old map, and a train ticket, he arrived in Paris with one goal: find out who Lucien Durand is and why he wants to bury Charles's painting. Eliza had wanted to come, but Milo insisted. If this is about the spiral, I have to face it myself. The moment he stepped off the train, Paris overwhelmed him. The noise, the glass towers, the golden bridges. But he moved with purpose. In his backpack, he carried a scanned copy of the 1971 letter signed A.B., a name with no face, no record. Yet everything began with that letter. The silent gallery. Lucien Durand's address led Milo to an unmarked gallery in the Marais district. No sign, no open hours, just a heavy black door and a keypad. He waited, sketched, watched. 3 days passed before anyone entered or exited. On the fourth day, an elderly woman exited carrying a box of photographs. She paused when she saw Milo on the steps. "You're not from here." Milo stood. "No, but I think I'm looking for something that once was." She eyed his spiral pendant, a small carving he'd made from wood. Her eyes narrowed. "Where did you get that symbol?" Milo didn't lie. A man named Charles Villeneuve painted it. And now, I see it everywhere. She exhaled sharply and said only one word. "Follow me." Below the street, they entered a hidden side door and descended a tight spiral staircase. Old stone steps, torch-like lights on the walls, the air cold and damp. It felt more like a crypt than a gallery. At the bottom, a vault door. She pressed her palm to a sensor. It clicked open. Inside was a secret archive. Ancient canvases, locked drawers, newspaper clippings, dusty film reels, and strange artifacts that did not belong in any museum. The woman turned to him and whispered, "This is the last trace of the Order of the Spiral, and Charles was one of us." The Order of the Spiral. She introduced herself as Beatrice Emmond, once known only by her initials, E.B. She had been a young painter in the 1950s when she first learned of the spiral. Not a symbol, but an idea. The spiral represents memory in motion, passed from soul to soul, not just through stories, but through creation itself. She showed him a mural, painted across stone, dated 1889, a painting nearly identical to Milo's forest scene. The lantern, the trees, the spiral, all of it. Different hands, different centuries, same image. You didn't create it, Milo. You remembered it. Milo's heart pounded. Then what are we remembering? She paused. Something Charles feared and refused to finish. Lucien's true purpose. Beatrice told him the truth about Lucien Durand. He was once a painter, but he stopped painting the day his brother went mad, after completing a canvas with a spiral at its center. Lucien believes the spiral corrupts memory, that it opens something that should remain closed. He doesn't want your painting because he values it. He wants it because he's afraid of it, and afraid of you. Milo sat in silence, stunned. Then why me? Beatrice handed him a faded photograph. Charles, young and smiling, with a woman and a little boy barely 4 years old. "That's not his son," she said. "That boy is you." To be continued. Milo left the archive with more questions than answers, and one terrifying certainty. His life was not what it seemed. Charles knew him, had met him, possibly saved him. Now, the spiral was not just a path. It was his inheritance, and Lucien Durand would do anything to erase it. The letter to the silent heir. 2046, early autumn. Village near Montfort. Milo returned from Paris with a restless mind and a heavier heart. Eliza awaited him at the Studio de Coeur, her eyes full of questions but her voice gentle. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Milo sat in Charles's old studio. On the cluttered desk, amidst brushes and faded sketches, lay a small, yellowed envelope. one Eliza hadn't seen before. It was addressed to my silent heir. With trembling hands, Milo broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. Charles's last message. If you're reading this, it means that the spiral has found you, as it once found me. I never spoke of you aloud. I never told Eliza, because I feared what the knowledge might do. You are part of something much older than either of us, a chain of voices echoing through time. Memory is not just in the mind. It lives in our creations, passed down silently. I painted the spiral to protect you, to mark you, to call you back when you were ready. I saved you from a loss I could not bear, though I did not know it then. Now it is your turn to walk the path I could not finish. Be brave. Listen well. Paint your truth. With all the love I never said. Charles. The weight of truth. Milo read the letter again and again. His breath caught when he realized. Charles had saved him. The boy in the photo. The boy in the painting. The boy lost in the fire years ago was him. I was saved? By Charles. Eliza nodded quietly. He kept you safe, hidden in memory and art. But it was never meant to end this way. Milo looked toward the window, the forest whispering beyond. Then the spiral isn't just a symbol. It's a promise, a warning, and a gift. A new beginning. That night, Milo took up his brush again. But this time, he painted not with grief, but with understanding. He painted light and shadow intertwined, a spiral slowly glowing in the darkness. In that quiet studio, with Charles's letter beside him, Milo finally found his voice. To be continued. The spiral had called him back to a story started long ago. Now Milo was ready to continue it. The Secret Map, 2046, late autumn. Studio Decur. Weeks after reading Charles's letter, Milo still felt the weight of the past pressing down on him. The spiral was no longer just a symbol. It was a mystery demanding answers. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through Charles's old supplies, Milo noticed an unusual canvas rolled up and tucked behind a broken easel. It was thicker and heavier than others. Curious, he unrolled it carefully. A painting within a painting. The canvas was unlike any other he'd seen. The surface was layered with thick brushstrokes, almost three-dimensional, and the colors seemed to shimmer even in the dull light. At first glance, it looked like a simple abstract swirl of colors, blues, greens, and whites mixing chaotically. But as Milo adjusted the light, a faint image appeared beneath the surface, a map. Paths, landmarks, and symbols emerged, overlaid with spirals at key points. It looked like a map of southern France, with dots marking specific locations, including Montvert and Lyon. A hidden message. At the bottom corner of the painting was a barely visible inscription in Charles's handwriting. For the one who walks the spiral's path, follow where the colors fade to find the heart. Milo stared at the map, trying to decipher the coded markings. Among the symbols was one he recognized, the spiral, but also new shapes, a key, a flame, and a broken circle. Eliza joined him, eyes wide. Charles never showed this to anyone, she said. It must be his final message, a guide to something he couldn't finish. The journey's promise. Milo felt a surge of determination. This map was more than a clue. It was an invitation. He looked at Eliza and said firmly, "We need to follow it, to all the places it shows, to find the heart." Eliza nodded, already thinking about logistics and what they might find. To be continued. The spiral was no longer just a symbol or a secret. It was a pathway. Milo's journey was just beginning. And somewhere, at the end of that path, awaited the truth Charles had hidden all his life. The first step. Milo and Eliza set out early morning, following the map's path. Their first stop was a small chapel in a remote village marked by a spiral carved into its wooden door. Inside, dust-covered faded frescoes. Milo's fingers traced the spiral symbol etched in stone near the altar. Behind a loose brick, they found a weathered box. Inside were old letters and sketches from Charles's youth, notes about memory, loss, and a secret society guarding the spiral's power. As they read, footsteps echoed behind them. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Lucy and Durand. The message in the canvas. Milo couldn't sleep that night. Charles's journal pages haunted him. Every stroke of the brush Charles once made seemed to whisper something more now, more urgent, more alive. He returned to the gallery and stood in front of the painting again, the final one Charles had ever touched. But this time, Milo looked beyond the image. He scanned the strokes, the angles, and suddenly he saw it. Hidden in the thick paint was a faint spiral, barely visible, almost erased. A symbol. The same symbol that had appeared in Charles's old notebooks, always beside his most cryptic entries. The spiral is not just form, it's memory, living memory, Charles had written. Milo now realized the message wasn't in the image, it was inside it. Encoded. Part 16. The room beneath the city. Guided by a riddle Charles had written in a letter, where sound becomes silence and stone remembers, Milo wandered the underground of Paris. He found himself standing before a rusted iron gate hidden deep beneath the oldest quarter of the city. It opened. Behind it, a stone staircase twisted down into darkness. Milo descended with a flashlight and the spiral pendant clutched in his hand. At the bottom was a vault. The air was cool, thick with age. He gasped. The chamber was filled with canvases. Dozens, hundreds, stacked, hung, even embedded into the walls. All painted in Charles's hand, yet none had ever been shown. Each bore the spiral somewhere, in the light, in a shadow, in a pattern of leaves or clouds. Suddenly, Milo understood. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a sanctuary for voices trapped in paint. The Pact of Light. Inside the ancient chamber beneath the chapel, the air was thick with dust and anticipation. Milo, Eliza, and Lucien stood around the wooden chest, its lid creaking as it slowly opened. Inside lay a collection of fragile papers, faded paintings, and a small leather-bound journal, Charles's final diary. Milo picked up the journal, his fingers trembling. "This is his last testament," Eliza whispered. As they read, they uncovered Charles's struggle. How the spiral was not just a symbol, but a conduit of memory and emotion, powerful enough to heal or destroy. Lucien spoke quietly. "I feared its power, but now I see the spiral's true purpose. It must be protected, not feared." The three agreed to form a pact, to guard the spiral's legacy and guide those who would follow its path. From that day forward, the Studio de Coeur became not only a school of art, but a sanctuary for memory and healing, where the voice of the heart would never be silenced again. Guardians of the Spiral. The chamber beneath the chapel echoed with the weight of history as Milo carefully turned the fragile pages of Charles's leather-bound journal. Each line was written with both urgency and tenderness, a testament to a man haunted by his past, but hopeful for the future. Charles had wrestled with the spiral's power for decades. The symbol was no mere artistic motif. It was a vessel, a key to unlocking memories that transcended time, carrying emotions and truth from one generation to the next. But such power was double-edged. In the wrong hands, it could distort reality and fracture souls. Eliza looked up from the text, eyes shining. Charles feared that if the spiral fell to those who wished to control it, they would silence the voices it carried forever. Lucien, who had until now stood guarded and distant, softened. "I once believed the spiral to be a curse, a destructive force. But now, seeing it through your eyes and Charles's words, I realize it is a beacon, one that demands respect and protection." Milo's heart swelled. The boy who had once been silent, lost in the shadows of grief, now stood at the center of a legacy that spanned centuries. They knew their path would not be easy. Dark forces, like those Lucien feared, were still out there, seeking to control the spiral's power for selfish ends. The pact they forged was not just a promise, but a responsibility to safeguard art's truest voice and ensure its freedom. Over the following months, Studio de Coeur transformed. It became more than a sanctuary for struggling artists. It was a haven for those who sought to listen deeply, to uncover lost stories, and to heal through creativity. The spiral was woven into their teachings, a symbol of resilience and connection. Visitors came from afar, some skeptical, others desperate for hope. Through art, they found a way to express what words could not reach. Milo, guided by Charles's journal and the support of Eliza and Lucien, began mentoring others, helping them find their own voices in the silence. One evening, as twilight bathed the village in soft gold, Milo stood by the window of the studio, gazing at the hills beyond. The spiral lantern from his first major painting glowed softly on his desk, a reminder of the journey behind and the road ahead. He whispered quietly, "The voice of the heart will never fade." New voices rising. Months passed, and the studio de Coeur thrived. Artists arrived from distant places, each carrying their own silent burdens, hopes, and dreams. Among them were those seeking healing as much as technique, a chance to give voice to what words could not express. Milo watched as a young woman named Amelie began to paint. She was quiet but fierce, her canvases a tempest of color and emotion. She told no one of her past, but in her brushstrokes, grief and courage danced together. Eliza guided a teenager named Lucas, whose hands trembled from fear and doubt. Slowly, Lucas learned to trust his own vision, discovering strength in vulnerability. Lucien, once distant and guarded, had become a guardian of stories, sharing tales of the spiral's ancient origins and the responsibility it demanded. One evening, Milo gathered the students in the studio. The spiral symbol was painted on the floor, glowing faintly in candlelight. "The spiral connects us all," Milo said softly. "It carries memories, pain, hope, and love through time. Each of you adds your own voice to this chorus. Paint your truth and listen for the voices that need to be heard." The room filled with quiet determination. The studio was no longer just a place to learn art. It was a sanctuary where the heart's voice could rise, unbroken. As the candle flames flickered, the spiral seemed to pulse gently, a silent promise that the legacy of Charles and those before him would endure. Shadows and light. The studio de Coeur flourished under the watchful eyes of Milo, Eliza, and Lucien. Yet as the spiral's influence grew, so did the shadows lurking beyond the village's quiet hills. One evening, a letter arrived, sealed with a black wax stamp bearing a twisted spiral, different from their symbol, harsher, darker. It warned that others sought to claim the spiral's power for themselves, to rewrite memories and silence truths. Milo read the letter aloud. "Beware the keepers of the forgotten. They come for the spiral. Protect it, or lose all that you hold dear." The warning chilled the room. Lucien's eyes narrowed. This is no idle threat. The keepers are real, a secret sect opposing the order of the spiral. They have hunted artists, stolen works, and erased legacies for centuries. Eliza clenched her fists. Then we must prepare. The spiral is not just a legacy, it's a battleground. Together, they fortified the studio, teaching the students not only to create but to defend their truths. The spiral became both shield and sword, a living force uniting those who dared to listen to the voice of the heart. Milo felt the weight of the future pressing on him, but beneath the fear was a fierce resolve. The keeper's shadow. Winter's chill had settled over the village, but the studio de Coeur burned bright with purpose. Milo, Eliza, and Lucien trained their students not just in art, but in guarding the spiral's secrets. Whispers of the keepers had grown louder, dark figures who sought to control memory itself. One night, the tranquility shattered. Shadows moved silently outside the studio windows. The door creaked under unseen hands. Milo's heart raced as footsteps approached. Eliza whispered, "They're here." The confrontation. The door burst open. Figures cloaked in black entered, eyes cold and unyielding. Lucien stepped forward, voice steady. "The spiral belongs to those who cherish truth, not those who seek to erase it." A tense standoff ensued. The leader of the keepers, a woman with piercing eyes, spoke. "Your order meddles with forces beyond your understanding. Relinquish the spiral, or be consumed by it." Milo held his ground, his hand resting on a small spiral pendant. "We protect the spiral to preserve voices lost to time." You cannot silence what is born of the heart. The keepers hesitated, then retreated into the night, leaving a warning in their wake. Aftermath and resolve. The attack left the studio scarred but unbroken. The community rallied, stronger and more united. Milo realized the spiral was more than a symbol. It was a living legacy, one that needed both courage and compassion to protect. He vowed to continue Charles's work, nurturing new voices and guarding their stories.